Al Johnson that I get even. I promise Al Johnson all the time that I get even. I make sure that I do not leave without him also being as bloody as I am. There would be no Boucher program. Where is he? I remember, my wife will confirm that I'm always forgetful. It's not something that has anything to do with how much hair I have or how gray it is. I've always been forgetful. And it was my turn to host the then chapter of the Boulay at our house. We didn't forget to prepare food for them, but I forgot that I was supposed to do a presentation. And I said, oh my goodness, the clock is going by. What am I going to say? What am I going to talk about? And when I knew anything, I started to speak about Edward Boucher. I don't know if anybody was listening but one, and I know the one who was listening. It was Al Johnson. I don't know if you were so it's not a lie. Now, the one thing that Al Johnson always forgets to remind us about is that there's genius all around us. And one of those persons is a member of his family. We're now going through some very treacherous and dangerous times. And he had a cousin who won, I think, the first Nobel Prize, earned by a black man. So I told you I was going to beat up on you. Who was it? Ralph Bunche. Of course, I believe that Al is probably as smart as Ralph Bunche, even though he never taught a class at Howard, even though he has not received an award equivalent to a Nobel Prize. I think so many of us are so deserving who will never receive those prizes that we shouldn't worry about it. Just remember, genius is all around us. And just because they have recognized one or two people who don't look like us does not mean we are not deserving. We are. I am so glad this is one of the happiest days of a year for me. Being surrounded by young people with energy and noble minds, nimble minds. Maybe they are noble also, but nimble minds and nimble fingers and quick muscles that get you out of a chair on time. That no longer happens to me, and I don't have to care. I'm surrounded by people who can get me up. As long as they don't let me fall, I'm content with that. Now, I know I'm supposed to say a few words about Edward Boucher. There's no such thing as a few words about Edward Boucher. He wrote very little. Was responsible for creating a medal. And I used his words all around that medal that's awarded now annually to the grown-ups. It's a big, heavy thing. And he was a man of few words because he didn't have to use words. He was educated in one of the most important sciences for the world, physics. He grew up in New Haven, walked the streets that we know in New Haven. In fact, he was born on the colored end of Bradley Street. Now, I know there's some people here who should know where Bradley Street is. Bradley Street was cut off by is it the connector or the highway?
Connector.
The connector. And it took out the house that belonged to Boucher's family. And I would walk that street hoping to find a scrap of paper, an old book, anything that would make us know that this man lived in New Haven, played in New Haven, went to school in New Haven, and without a doubt was one of the few geniuses in modern science. He was not taught to be anything other than who he was to become. His professors were Gibbs, Josiah Willard Gibbs, who would have won a Nobel Prize in science if they had been awarded during his time. He was considered to be the most important scientist in the United States in all of his time. He had to teach Latin in order to stay here at Yale and do physics. Everybody makes sacrifices, and we don't always know what they are, but can you imagine having to live with your mommy and daddy? You have a PhD, one of the first PhDs ever awarded in this nation, and he had to stay at home with his mommy and daddy, teach Latin in order to do physics. We would not be able to do anything in the laboratories these days had it not been Josiah Willard Gibbs. There's another man I can mention briefly, because I really want to talk about Edward Boucher a little bit more, and that is a fellow by the name of Silliman, who was sent to Europe, to Germany primarily, by the president of Yale to learn what are they doing and how do they do it and how are they teaching it. And he brings back the institution we now call graduate studies in the United States. These were just two of Edward Boucher's teachers. Now, for some reason, I have been forced to speak about something I know very little about, and that is epigenetics. Here he was, a young boy who looked a little like me, if not a lot like me. First on campus in the presence of his parents. His father was found on campus, I wouldn't say found, but appeared on campus in the presence of one Mr. Robertson. Mr. Robertson was a planter's son from Charleston, South Carolina. He arrived with Edward Boucher's, he arrived with Edward Boucher, the boy, Edward Boucher. Can you imagine a 7 or 8 year old boy called a manservant? But, you know, a young man from Charleston needed help getting through Yale, and he brought his help with him, Edward Boucher. Edward Boucher remained in New Haven after his master completed his undergraduate studies. They both remained in New Haven and formed families. Both had sons. Both sent their sons to Hopkins, then Hopkins Grammar School. Now, grammar does not mean anything other than languages. At that time, one may not have been able to speak English on campus. You had to use other languages. If you were going to be a good student, you had to use English, something other than English, usually French, Latin, German, Greek. I never would have graduated. Both sons graduated from Hopkins. Edward Boucher, father, former slave, has a son at Hopkins. His son graduates at the top of his class. By the way, he had gone to local schools on his way to Hopkins. He went to a one-room sort of classroom where he learned the first part of what one's supposed to learn in order to continue to go to school. After that, by the way, the school where he attended is still on Gulf Street. It's a sort of 2 or 3 story brick building. After that, he was recruited somehow to go to New Haven High School. There was nobody who looked like him at the New Haven High School at that time. Somebody heard that he was smart, and somehow it came to the attention of the people at Hopkins. Now, the people at Hopkins were a part of a very important community of educators. He enrolled in Hopkins. He had to sit for exams in order to be accepted. He would have been enrolling in, say, let's say 11th grade, but he would not have been accepted into the 11th grade unless he could show that he could compete with the students who had always been there through 11th grade. He sat for exams, and of course, he was more than good enough, as my grandmother would say. And he graduated valedictorian at a time when half the country couldn't read and write. He graduated valedictorian from Hopkins and enrolled immediately in Yale College. He graduated with orations. Orations meant summa cum laude. He did not speak when he graduated valedictorian from Hopkins because of who he was. Names on the program, valedictorian, he did not speak. He graduates from Yale College, summa cum laude, orations. Names on the program, he was not allowed to speak. Can you imagine how he must have